Hello everyone, you're on the Movie Storm channel, and now I'll tell you about the film, Thursday. The film begins in a 24-hour convenience store. Late at night, a small-time drug dealer, named Nick, is trying to decide which brand of coffee to buy for himself. His ex-lover, Dallas, and colleague killer Billy Hill, grow impatient, and tell him to hurry up. Nick finally makes his choice, but the dispenser is empty, so he complains to the cashier, and Dallas kills her. The next morning, Nick shows up at the doorstep of his old partner, Casey Wells, from his days as a drug dealer in Los Angeles. But Casey has cleaned up his life, he's now married and working as an architect, and he also wants to adopt a child. Nick just wants to leave a couple of suitcases in Casey's guest room to carry out some tasks. After Nick leaves, Casey begins to suspect that there's something in the suitcase, and eventually opens it, finding heroin inside. He calls Nick to yell at him for bringing drugs into Casey's house. Casey throws all the contents of the suitcase into the kitchen sink. Meanwhile, Ice, a Jamaican hitman, enters Casey's house and plans to kill him. But Casey manages to persuade him to smoke marijuana one last time. After Casey finishes his cigarette, Ice intends to kill him. However, he suddenly receives a phone call from rap agency and starts rapping, trying to secure a contract with a record label. At that moment, Casey takes advantage and knocks him out. Then, he ties him up and leaves him in his garage. Later, a representative from the child adoption agency comes to interview Casey about his suitability to be a father. Casey does his best to hide his past, as well as his recent encounter with a hitman. After some time, Nick's ex-lover arrives. Casey tried to get rid of the girl, but a phone call interrupted him, first from Nick, then from his wife. While Casey was busy, the girl settled in the living room and chatted with the doctor. She told a bunch of explicit stories about her role in an adult film, and then a story from Casey's life when he was still involved in criminal activities. Once, Casey and Nick wanted to scam a thug, Sledgehammer, by substituting flour for heroin. When the deception was revealed, they killed their opponents, including the girl. Hearing this story, the agent immediately prepared to leave, and Casey's arguments couldn't persuade him. And after that, the homeowner became a hostage again. Dallas demanded $2 million, but when she realized that Casey genuinely didn't know where the money was, she decided to wait for Nick, who, as it turned out, had double-crossed her. Dallas wanted to pass the time in amorous pleasures, but Casey tactfully declined. However, his opinion didn't concern her at all. She put up a photo of Casey's wife to watch the process and took matters into her own hands. But Nick's accomplice, Billy, calmed her down by putting a hole in the girl's head. It turned out that Nick had double-crossed him too. Billy pulled out a circular saw and blowtorch, all the while narrating the story of how he spent 16 hours cutting the girl, cauterizing her wounds, thus preventing her from bleeding to death, and promised to do the same to Casey, just to pass the time. They are interrupted by arriving cops, who came to the neighbors. Billy went to observe their actions, and in his absence, Casey freed himself and armed himself with a frying pan. When Billy returned, Casey struck him several times, but when it came to aiming the revolver at his head, he couldn't pull the trigger. And because of this, he hung him next to the rapper. Nick called again and confessed that he had informed the police about the money, and they would be paying a visit soon. He also mentioned that in the near future, Nick's partners, who happened to be African Americans, would come to visit him. He advised the blonde guy to flee the country, as well as a hint about where to find the money. Nick himself was severely injured, and it was unlikely that we would see him alive after that conversation. Casey cleaned up the blood-stained kitchen, but before he could clean himself up, someone else arrived, Detective Kazarov. He gave the keys to the car that Nick had borrowed earlier, and left a gift. Detective emphasized that the money had to be ready by 7 o'clock, as he had worked with Nick for so many years, and must know where to find the $2 million. Before leaving, the detective shoot up rapper and the maniac, whose presence Casey had deduced, and advised him to clean up the mess before his wife returned home. Armed with a circular saw, the blonde guy took care of it in a little over an hour. As he was carrying out the bags, he suddenly remembered something that Nick had mentioned about a spare tire, and Casey soon found not only the $2 million, but also a gift from Nick for himself and his wife. Later, he called the gangsters from the rapper's phone, and set up a meeting at his house, at 7 p.m. Exactly at 7, the cops barged in, led by Kazarov, and a few minutes later, heavily armed Jamaicans arrived. They also broke into the house. Meanwhile, Casey met his wife and told her that they needed to leave the country urgently. Initially hesitant, upon seeing the $2 million, her doubts vanished, and they quickly headed to the airport. Please share your thoughts on this film in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more. Good luck, and see you soon.